Hey, hey everyone. Well, it's 8:53, and I'm getting ready to shut down for the day. But I hadn't done one of these lives in a while, so I thought I'd pop in here and pose a question. And the question simply is, are you paying attention? There's so much old wisdom in there around the idea. Excuse me. Of course, when I start speaking, my chest starts acting up. There's so much old wisdom in these about keeping things simple, the simplicity of things, and the ability to move forward in the world or through the world with this massive amount of data that's being spat at us. There was I think on Forbes magazine this evening that I was watching, and it had something, and I can't remember now. I was trying to remember the amount of data that's being produced, the current amount of data that's available in the world, and the number was just extraordinary. Like there's so much raw information that's circulating in this world. I mean, it's and again, it's staggering. And when I'm looking at this massive amount of data, absolutely, Maureen. Look at this massive amount of data that exists in the world that never existed before. And not only does it exist, it's accessible, right? It's accessible to all of us. I mean, Facebook just by itself has 2 billion people. And you think of the outreach that we have with things like Google, and we haven't ever stopped to think. I shouldn't say that. A lot of people are actually thinking about this now, but as individuals, I mean, have we really stopped to think about what's happening because of this inundation of information? What's happening when we get our choices are in the billions, not just a couple choices, but the choices are in the billions. When you Google, let's say you Google health and wellness, right? So Google will give you the search results in about 0.68 seconds. You should try it. Try it right now. So if you Google weight loss programs, you'll get maybe a couple of billion responses, a couple of billion hits in less than a second, or 0.68 of a second. I mean, it's just extraordinarily quick. And not only is it quick, but we have access to all this information that hasn't been vetted. So we have all this raw data. And what I mean by vetted, meaning that, what is the standard in which you decide on what enters into your mind? What is the standard that you decide prior to hearing something that what you want to hear? I'm not talking about putting blinders on and being unwilling to evolve and mature and grow in your understanding. But instead of actually wading through information without kind of blindly, are we able to walk into this reservoir of massive amount of data with particular questions in mind, and important questions? We have this existential crisis as humans, and we know that our time is limited. We know that we're mortal. We know that we're all going to die. We don't know how to consolidate or how to contend with that. That's challenging. And there was a great quote by Carlos Castaneda. Sorry, I don't know what's going on in my throat here. And the quote by Carlos Castaneda really, he said that, we live in terror of the end of our life. We live in terror of our death simply because we're living pretending it doesn't exist. So we live in kind of pretend ignorance of the fact that we're mortal and that we're all going to die. So we live this really bizarre, very detached life, frantically keeping ourselves busy enough so that we don't have to pay attention to the ultimate reality for all of us. And so one of the tricks was, one of the tricks or the suggestions is that come face to face with the reality of your eventual demise, and make peace with that on this side of eternity. Decide what that looks like. And it's actually probably one of the most powerful things I've ever done. Now, there was a book by Dr. Wayne Dyer called The Power of Intention. And this is where I've referenced this book before a couple times. And when I read a book or listen to an audio book, there's always something inside of it that there's one phrase, one key phrase that sticks out. And that book, that audiobook, I listened to that one audiobook about 100 times. But that one key thought is the thing that stood out. And I remember bits and pieces of the rest of it, but that's the one thing that has never left my mind, because it was so impactful. So that if I decide at 55, assuming that I get killed in a car accident or nothing, silly happens like that, and I make it to 95 to 97, well, the ultimate goal setting is deciding how I want to leave this planet, how I want to feel, in the last days or last weeks of my life. What do I want to contribute? And when I'm dead and buried, who will be at my graveside? Who will come to my funeral? And it's not a point of, it's not an ego. It's not your ego saying, "Listen, when I'm dead, I want celebrities and I want the prime minister at my graveside." No, I want to make sure that my life actually had some merit, and that the only way I can see leaving this planet, somewhat happily, if that's possible, is to know that your life actually served a purpose, and a powerful one, and that every moment of your life was actually given to doing something really extraordinary with it, right? Making as much meaning, powerful meaning as possible for yourself and the lives that you connect with. But it's so there's a bit of a contrast in thought process if I'm paying attention to the fact that I'm going to die, and there's no it's not a morbid thought, like it's not a fearful thought. It's just going, okay, that's really interesting. That's a reality. So how much time do I waste? How much time do I waste each day hiding and pretending? What sort of process am I using to decide what's important? And I find we're so good at what's the word? Kind of a bit of a bait and switch. We're so highly effective at hiding the truth from ourselves, and we know we do it. It's these thoughts and ideas and emotions can drift into your mind, and then you have this little bit of impulse to just kind of give your head a shake. And that's a bit of a saying, right? Give your head a shake. We kind of shake our head and we kind of get rid of these nasty little twinges from our conscious, saying, you don't really believe that to be true, and you don't really want to be here, and you really don't like this, and you're really quite unhappy. We get these warnings from our inner consciousness that we actually avoid or we disregard. And it's there's processes that I've been working with more and more as I go through life, is actually creating something called it's a vetting process. And the vetting process, now I created the vetting process physiologically, right? So for example, again, these ideas I just stick in my head. Now, this is really interesting. When I do executive coaching, and I do work with addictions, and I do some, I do coaching with general individuals, and things that I learned when I was a trainer, when I was involved in strength coaching and orthopedic rehab. There was a Dr. Vladimir Yanda. Dr. Vladimir Yanda. He was a pediatric neurologist. He was a physical therapist and a medical doctor. This guy's, he was a brilliant man. I believe he was like the father of modern physical therapy. I think, the Yanda, if you look at Janda, Yanda, you'll find lots of citations and stuff to this gentleman. Anyhow, the basis of his research was part of the training program we had gone through. We were getting involved in studying the injury mechanism. And something that was actually really quite profound that the idea that you know, if my body was not, if my body had excessive tension and tone in it, let's say I have an injury to my lower back, and I have and my traps are exceptionally tight, and so the injury to my lower back and my traps both have a high degree of excitation, like they're on, right? So there's a lot of information there. The muscles are active, metabolically there's a lot of activity, not a lot of blood flow. It's kind of, you know, there's this kind of this nervous energy, maybe a bit of a guarded response in your lower back because of the injury, and it's there, right? I mean, you've been injured before, you know what that feels like. And if I get a stressor coming in, right, let's say a mental stress, or I'm just having a bad day, and my stress level goes up, the energy inside the body actually will take the areas of my traps, take the areas of my lower back, and it'll actually tighten them up. So energy goes to where energy resides, right? So energy pulls in energy. Stress goes to where stress resides. Now, this is a really important thing. So when I'm training, when we started walking people through the physical rehabilitative process, well, we had to do two things. We had to down-regulate, right? So we had to release the tension in the areas that were chronically tight. We had to reduce the tension there. And then we actually had to, we had to, in turn, create a stabilizing force on the other side of that, right? So reducing the tension inside the musculature that has all that tension, and then as we do that, then we slowly bring up some stabilizing areas of the body, right? So we find a way to balance it out. But here's the interesting piece. This is so important, and this is one of these things that I found fascinating, and every time I talk to people about it, they go, aha, that explains so much. Yeah, and again, so if psychological energy comes into the body, raises my cortisol levels, right? So my energy, my nervous system is being jacked up because of the stress level. Pre-existing areas of tension become tighter faster, more so than areas that tend to have less muscle tone, right? So all of a sudden my neck is killing me, my lower back is killing me because of an increase in emotional stress, which increases parasympathetic tone. So my nervous system is kind of jacked up. So I have increased tone inside the muscular system, which actually puts, and the areas that are tight and irritated become tighter, more irritated because, well, you know, stress goes to where stress resides, and it becomes more pronounced. Now, if you don't understand what that means, it just means that, you know, we can. It's the adding insult to injury. And why this was important, because all the work that I'm doing in, let's say, neuropsychology and brain mapping for executives and for the general population, when I give them this brain mapping, I became fascinated by the fact that watching somebody who, let's say, in front of me, who's, let's say they're unraveling a little bit, and let's say Kathy's unraveling, right? And you know, Kathy, you're not, but now I see your name out there, so I'll use it as an example. Let's say Kathy's unraveling. But what's interesting, when I ask her, you know, why are you unraveling? Like, what's occurring for you? And she'll lay out this thing. Well, you know, this is what's going on. But we'll look at what she says is going on, and the energy behind it are actually mismatched, right? So. And what I mean by that is that we have a tendency that if I'm having let's say I'm having a bit of a crisis in my life, emotional crisis of some sort. Well, if it's not very well defined, and it's a little bit ambiguous, and let's say, you know, there's many things I'm struggling with, but right now this is the one I'm talking about. So underneath that space, so underneath the current problem, and if you just drop down, imagine a root system of a plant. So, you know, the plant, what pops through the dirt is the problem that I'm contending with. And below the ground is the unconscious access to all problems of similar emotional intensity and kind, right? So the brain goes through, and there's this thing called association. And the brain says, well, you know, this is what you're saying, and this is what you're experiencing. And have we had that memory before? Have we had that experience before? And the brain will start finding other associative memories, right? So let's say it's called them old stories, and they'll link up all those old stories and connect them so they actually come through the one you're telling today. Now, why that's a problem is that what you say you're dealing with, what you say the problem is an exaggeration of perhaps decades of unresolved problems. And the energy is sitting there, and the energy is finding a way out. So you know, again, good example is you look in the United States and you see the riots and you know, just the chaos in Portland and Seattle and Minneapolis. You see these things falling apart. Well, yes, you know, I know there is some social issues, of course, in the world in general, but it was a exaggerated response, and it was an emotional discharge. Because why? Because the whole world's been under lockdown, right? And so economic challenges, just, you know, we as humans don't do a good job of actually cleaning up our messes as we go along. We just keep packing more and more problems on because we don't really have great tools for it anymore, and we're so distracted, and we're just trying to manage 100 things at a time. So what's fascinating though is that when I have a problem, if I don't take the time, I don't have a series of practices. So I have meditation practices. I use prayer as a practice. I have breathing practices. I have exercises of practice. I study, which is kind of a practice. When I'm very kind of hyper aware of what's going on in my head and my body, and part of my practice is actually vetting the emotions and the thoughts and allowing the ones that are just complete nonsense and bullshit just to keep on going, saying, well, you know, I thought that, but whatever, it doesn't mean it's true, and I just kind of wish it well on its way. And I return to center as often as possible. I return to center as quickly as humanly possible. But I actually know where center is, right? And I think the cautionary thing that if you find an area of your life that is not working the way it should be working, though you know better and you know different, right? So you actually have the intellectual knowledge. So if I held a gun to your head and said, okay, Holly, what are you supposed to be doing? List down 5 things that you know that you should do to move your life forward in the next 18 months. And you say, well, okay, I got to stop doing this. I got to stop doing that. I have to start doing this. I have to start doing this. And maybe I should do this as well. Okay, then what the hell do you need me for, right? So we have this idea. We have knowledge, like we do know better. I mean, you know, and there's details that can be worked out on the knowing better part of it, but we do know better. But we don't do better, and most of our misery, you know, and I contend the vast majority of our misery actually lies in the contrast between knowing better and doing better, because we're well aware of what we've done. We're well aware of what we're not doing. We're well aware of what should be done. And we don't know why we're not doing it. We're well aware of when we emotionally discharge inappropriately at an elevated response to something that didn't warrant that kind of outburst, right? And it's so interesting is that, you know, the nervous system operates in the same kind of functionality when it comes to physical stress and emotional stress, because it's the same brains, you know, similar neurotransmitters, same nervous system, everything's similar. So instead of it just being a big psychological issue, right, and where, you know, you got to talk the shit out of it for, you know, 5 years, I can't see, I don't understand why it should take that long, right? And I don't think it should. I think unless it's extreme circumstances, I think we're way more powerful. We just don't have the stability. We just don't have, you know, way too many things going on, and it's far too ambiguous, and we haven't kind of filtered through all of it to really, you know, kind of take a stand. So if we know physiologically that if I increase the level of stress, let's say mental stress, things that are currently tight and rigid in my body just absorb more energy. So, you know, what's tight gets tighter. Stress goes to where stress resides physically. Emotionally, stress goes to where stress resides. So I have an emotional stressor coming in. You know, Kathy's tearing a strip off me for, you know, for not showing up for a business meeting, and so I get this energy coming in. My brain is trying to match the circumstances of a woman in a suit yelling at me, and my brain's going, Jesus, when did that happen before? And maybe it'll throw back to school where my teacher was beating me with a yardstick, you know, because I'm that old, right? Back in the day, teachers could beat us. but my brain is trying to find the representation, and maybe finds 15 different representations of female in that position with that kind of tone, and I'm reacting that way. My brain links them all together, and instantly I'm reacting with, let's say, 14 separate individual episodic memories, and I'm watching her, and she's yelling at me, and my response is I'm basically crippled to be able to respond properly, because my brain is trying to reference it. And again, that's the whole process of, again, stress grows where stress resides. If I'm currently stressed out physically, then whatever's not well in me gets lit up at the same time. The areas of increased tone and damage inside the body tend to respond much more rapidly to any change in stress level. It's the same thing emotionally. Any change in stress level, it just evokes previous experiences that are still energetically charged, and they light up, and of course they give me an exaggerated experience of what Kathy was saying to me in that example. So it's really interesting, right? And so listen, as much as I like personal development, as much as I love spirituality, as much as I love all the language, it's just sometimes you just got to strip it down and make it a lot simpler, because we live in a very interesting world, and I'm polarized by a lot of religious language. I'm polarized to it. I don't like watching things on TV and seeing 10,000 people in a mega church. That doesn't do anything for me. And actually, I'm polarized, and yet I'm a very I believe I'm a very spiritual human being. I believe there's a God. I do believe in those things, right? But I'm polarized to language, right? When it comes to personal development. And a lot of the esoteric languages, I'm a bit polarized to that language, because if I strip away all the language, do you actually know what you mean, right? If I strip away all the language, and one of the challenges I have within the personal development world, which is why I got more into the neuroscience part of it, is that somebody read a book and took a course, but it's just not that simple, right? And it doesn't mean that the words that we use are not accurate. It doesn't mean the language that we're using is not accurate. But somebody once said, this was actually a Jordan Peterson thing, and I love the way he expressed this. He said, I knew earlier on in my career, and Jordan Peterson was a brilliant human being. He said, I knew earlier on in my career that I was actually lying, and I was saying things because he had great memory and great verbal acuity. Like, he was, again, a very brilliant human being. But I've got a good memory for things, but do I have the right to pronounce something and, let's say, put a post out that is not my information, for one? I'm stating it as if it is, right? And taking the credit for somebody else's thought process, right? So it's almost a form of let's say, plagiarism when we use things that we really haven't embodied fully. It's like saying somebody that somebody was a Christian. Maybe I'll get shot for this example, but I believe it to be true. There's a big difference between going to church on Sunday doesn't make you a Christian any more than standing in a garage makes you a car, right? And this was a great quote I heard a couple of weeks ago. And I believe that to be true, because the idea of Christianity, it's actually a verb, right? Not a noun for me. And there should be, you should judge a tree by the fruit it bears. It should be obvious. It should be obvious that, if that's what you say you are, then either it's a sign of virtue signaling, or it means that there's a lifestyle that you've devoted yourself to, and it should be obvious in your thoughts, words, and deeds. So you can embody yourself that way, or you can, which means that if I ask you a question, I'm going to get a really thoughtful, not just somebody barking out quotes of biblical phrases, but something that's actually really, it's a thoughtful process, right? It's a well thought out philosophical answer to a question. And when you hear somebody speak about it, it's just, they have some flexibility. I find that people that are they're very grounded in their faith or grounded in knowledge, when you ask them a question, they don't get offended, and they're very, very flexible, and they're willing to engage. People that don't own the information, that don't really understand it, have no flexibility, and don't like engaging. In fact, they get very irritated if you question anything. And when that kind of personality is there, it tells me that there's nothing underneath it, because they really don't know what they're talking about, right? They have an emotional connection to something they don't understand. It feels good, it's like trying to take candy away from a baby. Babies don't know why, the baby knows that it tastes good and it spikes my insulin and it creates all these happy feelings inside of me. I don't know what the hell it is, but I'll be damned if you're going to take it. And I get that feeling when it comes to the personal development and spiritual world. It's just people get really get offended if you push, but we should be able to push. One lady I'm training as a coach for the I Am Project, in our last conversation, she had this great website and great video for it and great content, and I challenged her. I said, "So you're gonna put this out there? But what gives you the right to do that?" And I kind of threw her off, and I said, "Well, listen, people are gonna challenge you. So if you really want to make a difference, make sure you know what you're talking about. If you really, really want to make it, you don't need a PhD, but just really do your work. And if you say something, like these conversations that I have with you guys." I have these conversations because I like working things out in my head, right? And I like talking them out. And so the stuff that I'm coming up with, I'm vetting it against you, because Tobin will, either Tobin's going to roll his eyes, his head, going, "Jesus, this guy never shuts up," or he's going, he actually makes some good points. And I like hearing I pull these little nuggets out of his ramblings, because I can take 2 or 3 things and it really makes sense, and it actually makes a difference in how I run my life, right? So it's not, again, so I'm not I'm not selling you an idea. I'm just having a conversation to see what you think. But again, it's just, again, to loop back to the very beginning, the idea of are you paying attention, is that I really think that if we want to make sure the remainder of our lives has the potential for a profound sense of purpose, that deep sense of satisfaction. And I rarely say happiness, because happiness is fleeting. If you have happiness show up, off and on, more power to you. But that's not the goal. The goal is to be of purpose. The goal is to be of service. The goal is to be productive, right? Inside that space, and what you get is that you become incredibly resilient. People can rely on you. And then you have that profound sense of purpose and being, and then what shoots off of that is joy, right? But the whole idea of happiness, it's the pursuit of happiness, not really a good thing to do, right? Because it's the pursuit of purpose is fundamentally the most important thing, and then from there, of course, you get to experience the positive emotions because of that. But if you're really paying attention, and you really want your life to filter the way it's supposed to, and to move in the direction, you have to actually choose the perceptual filters that you look through to, and how you view the world. So your perceptual filters, it's just, when I see things, what am I actually seeing? When I see things in the world, what am I teaching my brain to ignore, and what am I teaching my brain to pay more attention to? So for example, I pay attention to, when I'm driving, we got thunder and lightning. Awesome. All right. Squirrel. I pay more attention to scenery. Pay more attention to the color of trees. I'm fascinated by the different colors of green, from the various trees to the grass and plants. I pay attention to those things. I pay attention to my children much more. I'm very aware of the little nuances in their behavior, right? Because again, my kids are growing up, and as I tell them, one day I'll be dead. So I want to make sure that if I'm hanging out with you, I want to make sure that I'm engaged. But I created these filters in my brain. I created these points of focus, so that I hear things that are important to me, and things that I don't waste a lot of time doing things that are no longer important to me. I invest my time and energy into things that are congruent, meaning that it's just what I read, how I eat, the type of exercise I do, the belief system that I'm creating. Everything I'm doing is actually, it's been vetted by a set of values and ideas, and that I've worked on, developed inside my mind, that allows me to move through the world and kind of just just kind of getting rid of things that no longer are representative of how I want to show up. But if you don't pay attention, and you don't actually have that declaration of this is who I am and this is what I stand for, and that's just the first part. Just the utterance of that really is meaningless because it's much a little more complicated than that. But if I say this is who I am and this is what I stand for, so okay, it's a great utterance. Now, is that an embodied response? Meaning that is it inside of you? So there's a CEO of a drug company I'm working with, and what we're doing with this individual is that we're consolidating all his knowledge, right? So all his, very, very smart guy. And so what we're doing, we dropped underneath it and we created a value-based system so he could look at his whole world. And now this value-based system sits underneath his entire world, from his physical health, his personal relationships, his role as the CEO for this company. And underneath all those various pieces of his life, we have a set of values that are basically controlling all of it. And so what we're doing is that we're helping him develop a really higher level of intuition, right? Thanks, Lance, buddy. We're developing a higher sense of intuition. So because all this information up here, so he's the CEO of a drug company and he's got all these things, they're changing the company's offerings and they're bringing on investors, but he's got a fiance over here. He's a physical guy, so he's a very fit guy. So, all these pieces, and they're all him, but they're all kind of fragmented because they're all different parts of him. And so, like the expression is, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, that's kind of true. I mean, even though that's no longer true because we have cell phones, what happens in Vegas is on Facebook in 8 seconds. But but it makes sense. But the idea being is that if I take you from this one environment, I put you somewhere else, do you show up with the same moral compass and values and tendencies and behaviors? And are you predictable to yourself? And quite often we're not. So this process is that we created a vetting process that's based on a set of values that we worked on that he declared. And so we're organizing his life from his physical health to his spirituality, to his family, his relationships, his sense of contribution, his career, and we're building his entire world to the set of values. And it's a form of neuromapping. So we're kind of remapping the way his brain sees the world, so that over the course of, it'll take us probably about 90 days to go through this process. But at the end of the 90 days is that he'll look at something and his brain will be able to simply get rid of what is not relevant to him immediately and start bringing on things that are more in line with his chosen way of looking at the world. So he just dismisses a whole bunch of stuff that's no longer important. And when I started doing this process for myself, what was really quite fascinating is that the noise in my head died down. Like massively. Because I know a lot of you out there may be, when you're trying to make a decision about, what should I do? Should I change my career? Should I, how am I going to lose weight? What am I, having all these decisions. And the decision-making process, you're leaning over your shoulder and you're talking to your brain, you're having this conversation in your head. But it's like having the audience to The Price is Right? You're standing up there trying to make a decision, you got the showcase showdown, right? This is your life. You look over your shoulder and you got 800 screaming morons behind you giving you advice. And these are all fragments of your personality scattered across the timeline of your existence. And they have nothing in common with you other than the fact that they are in your brain, but they all have different emotional states. So the 10-year-old's there, the 21-year-old's there, the 17-year-old one's there. And they all have a conversation, they all have an opinion. And you're trying to run your life forward and you keep turning over your shoulder and asking the opinion, what should I do next? What should I do with my life next? How should I approach this? And you get an answer and an impulse, but you don't know where the frick it came from. And you say, well, I thought it. No, you didn't think it. You remembered it. In fact, we rarely think. People think, yeah, I've been thinking a lot. It says, yeah, I doubt it. And they go, well, that's kind of rude. It's, well, no, you've been processing old memories, but thinking is actually a lot different. So in this conversation here, what we're doing is predominantly because it's kind of a freestyle conversation. There's remembering and then there's processing. So, we're pulling an idea, pull it forward, and it's the pulling forward and talking about it and then going back and forth. There's a little bit of thinking and a whole lot of remembering, but we're pulling the memories forward so we can explore them. And then we can explore them openly, so it's a conscious decision, and we're aware of what's coming from. We keep stepping back and forth and back and forth, and that's actual, that's kind of an integrated thought process. Otherwise, most of us, all we do is we're just remembering, but we just keep pulling these old ideas forward, saying, "Well, this is what I believe." Well, that's what you had believed, and that's what you had thought. You think it's what you currently think. Well, not necessarily, because it's just an old idea that keeps getting pulled forward, and we haven't. Sorry, a lot of lightning up here. We haven't updated our hardware. So anyhow, I just find this stuff so fascinating. If you find yourself frustrated, you find yourself just running in circles, and you find that, one part of your life is doing amazing, but you're just not doing well over here, then it's that fragmental way of thinking. So if you have a powerful part of your life, and let's say there's a skill set, or there's a moral compass, or there's a way of being in one part of your life that's powerful, but there's 3 other parts of your life that are just abysmal. You don't know what the hell's going on and why you can't get it going. Then what you'll find, of course, if you're willing to do the work, and again, I do work with people like this, one-on-one. So if you're ever interested in having these private conversations with me, let me know. I'd be glad to see if we can work, we can work into the process. But let's say you take the idea of one part of your life that you're quite successful in, regardless of what it is, and then say, well, if I strip it away, say, no, what is it about me inside that part of my world? What are the characteristics that make me good at what I do, right? What are the characteristics that keep me here? What are the characteristics that that really allow me to shine in this one part of my life? Even though you may have, maybe you have other parts of your life you struggle a lot, but there's one part I feel very confident in. And then if you strip it away, and then what you're left with is just a couple of character strengths or values or ideas. So in this part of my life, this is what I do, right? So I'll give an example. When I moved back from Europe, I came back to Canada, and I had no education and no money, right? Grade 10 education, no money in the bank, and I couldn't even get a bank account in the beginning because I was gone. I was so far off the grid for so many years that the government didn't know who I was. So I went through this process of rebuilding my health, because my health was just in disrepair because I was having way too much fun for far too many years, right? But I got to the point where I started developing an education. I started getting healthier and healthier. My lungs started to spit out all the tobacco and hash I've been smoking for 15 years. Right, my body started to level itself off, and then I had the opportunity to operate my own business. And I go, well, I don't know anything about operating a business. I said, but you know what? I went from no education to no health, no money, and I actually built an education. Right. I mean, I had help, right? I didn't do it all on my own, but I put in the work to become educated. I put in the work to become a healthier individual. I put in the work to become a competitive bodybuilder, right? And I go, well, if I can figure that out, then I can run a freaking business. So I extracted the same tenacity and focus that I used in building my health and my education, and I just took those attributes that I pointed towards my business and said, I'm going to be self-employed, and that's the mindset. And it wasn't actually that hard, because I didn't have to think of all the nuances of everything I did over the course of a bunch of years to when I started my education and what that looked like and all the fine-tuned details. It was just the basic raw information. I went from here to here. I did that. So okay, well then if I did that, then I can pretty much do anything. And that's been kind of my mindset. It doesn't mean I've been successful at everything that I've done, and probably failed at probably 80% of the stuff I tried. But I'm still moving forward, which is kind of the funny part about the whole journey, right? But because I know that I did this thing before, I don't need to know all the details. So in my mind, I had this idea of truth and courage and compassion as these values that vet the incoming information, that give me a lens in which to look at to the world. And those ideas, those 3 words, that truth and courage and compassion, filter down into tens of thousands or perhaps hundreds of thousands of ideas and experience and memories over the course of the 55 years of my life. And I access those the same way I would access my pain, right? So accessing my pain is generally an unconscious process, either physically or emotionally. But accessing my wisdom actually was conscious. I had to decide to do that. And funny enough, all of us actually have way more wisdom than we do pain and misery. But pain and misery, unfortunately, are richer in detail, richer in nuance, right? They're like high definition experiences because that's what we do with negative experiences. But by creating this filtering process, creating this filtering process of these three values allowed me to go in and access the entire history of my life, everything I've ever read. And it's not a conscious thing, right? But it's an intuitive thing. So now I know exactly what I'm looking for. I'm looking for things that match truth. I'm looking for things that match courage. And I'm looking for things that match compassion. And that's what my brain is actually hunting for on a day-to-day basis. Anyhow, I've talked way too long. But anyhow, it's really interesting stuff, right? I mean, well, I think it is anyhow. But if you didn't think it was interesting, you wouldn't be listening. But it's a thought process. I mean, and that's what I find so exciting. That, you know, it can be really that simple if we're willing to slow down, take the time, and decide, you know, what our core is, right? Right, Shauna? Right? Core strength. If I develop core strength, everything else becomes easier, right? If I develop a core identity, very, very specific, and you really work hard at that, then the path forward becomes way easier. Anyhow, I gotta go. I've been talking way too long. Guys, thanks for hanging out with me. I always appreciate your indulgence and helping me work through those things. All right. All right, take care.